Have you ever wondered what it takes to successfully raise money? I have worked with hundreds of capital campaigns across dozens of industries, and I'm here to share with you proven methods for raising money in record time and at the lowest cost, while also obtaining capital at the lowest price. My name is Carl Dakin, and welcome to Motivated Money. This is Carl Dakin with the Motivated Money podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how raising capital in a political campaign is similar yet different from raising money for a small business or a nonprofit. With me today, I have Anna Burrell as my guest, a longtime friend. And she has recently campaigned for the position of mayor of the city of Denver. She will talk with us about that in more detail. But before we get into depth with Anna and a whole bunch of questions I have for her, I just want to give everybody a backdrop. If you're new to the Motivated Money podcast, this is all about raising capital. And typically we work with entrepreneurs who are in the design, staging, or already in the mix of running and operating a capital campaign. And the motivated money approach is something I've developed over a period of time to try to make these campaigns go quicker, better, faster. And all too often, an entrepreneur can get entangled in a campaign that seems to go on forever without ever achieving their capital goals. And at the same time, they find they're spending a lot of time and money that they don't really have in raising capital or trying to raise capital. And that's largely because they're talking to the wrong people. At the end of the day, there are people who care about who you are, what you're doing, what your success is, and they are actually the best people to talk to as investor candidates. And in the motivated money approach, we talk about stakeholders, people who stand to benefit from the success of your organization before making any investment, because they have greater motivation in their own self-interest. They can benefit from your success. They may need you to succeed in order to attain their own success. And therefore, if we're going to start with a quick, efficient capital campaign, we want to start with those who care the most, those who are most capable of making an investment. And we want to tailor and design our entire capital campaign to talk to them about them so that we can get quickly to an investment decision. All those things contribute to a higher probability of successfully completing a capital campaign, and that's why we're here. So in each episode of the Motivated Money podcast, we're going to kind of single out one or more different issues or topics about how to raise capital that you can use and hopefully apply in your current or next capital campaign. So now let me have Anna. Anna, good morning.
Good morning, Carl.
So Anna, you've done a lot of different things. You're running a business, and you recently declared as a candidate for the mayor of Denver. And I understand that you've now withdrawn and thrown your support behind one of the many different 24 different candidates running for the mayor of Denver. But tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background? How did you get to where you're at today? Then let's dive into twigs for a little bit before getting into political campaigning.
Perfect setup. It has a lot to do with it. They have a lot to do with each other, actually. It's been a very natural progression. So I was raised in an agriculture consulting firm working with onions all across the world. This means culturally I have a little bit of everything, which is fantastic to see. What you were talking about with stakeholders and being able to serve and engage them was absolutely spot on. So after walking onion fields in 18 different countries and pretty close to 32 different states in the United States, I've ran a frankincense essential oil distillery, burned myself out as some entrepreneurs tend to do. And then I went out into the woods for 6 months and fell in love with the mountains and came into Denver. I decided I wanted a big city close to mountains with sunshine. I was still precocious enough to want to have resources like that. So then I've been here for about 5 years. Um, Tried to work really hard for someone else, and that didn't quite work out. And then I felt the metaphorical 2x4 swinging down from the universe, and I was like, "All right, kid, I put you here for a reason. Let's go ahead and do what you're here to do." And so, from this very unique international perspective of business, of stakeholders, of the intersection between science and the food industry, and how people and business can interact and shape all of that, I started a sustainability consulting firm. I have always seen the power of.
And Anna, not to be a terrible moderator here, but what's the name of that company?
All right. So I started Twigs and Co. It's Twigs and Co. Sustainability Consulting and Implementation. We make the joke that implementation is our last name because we're not here to give you a roadmap that then gathers dust on your desk. We're going to be here with you every step of the way. And in doing that, I tried to pitch this idea to a handful of my other consultant friends, being like, hey, there's this really big open spot in the middle of the market where business and things like corporate social responsibility actually are speaking to two sides of the same coin. You can reduce turnover, increase engagement, open up entirely new markets, and increase market share using sustainability practices in a way that meets the needs of stakeholders. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's a really good idea. You should do it. And I'm like, no, you should do it. You already have the firm.
So Anna, when you use the term sustainability, we hear several different flavors of that, from economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, business sustainability, if that's different from economic sustainability. How do you define the term?
The ability to keep going. Honestly, it's not my favorite term. I much more prefer regeneration, which speaks to repairing damage and finding new and better ways to do things. However, right now, in the spirit of speaking to people where they're at, we use the term sustainability, but it's the ability to continue going and ideally have the space to be able to evolve to practices that are less damaging.
Okay. And by less damaging, damaging to who? Who's our victims?
Honestly, if you want, with how the systems are set up right now, it could be just about anyone. If you want to talk about the failure rate of entrepreneurs as they try to start new businesses, if you want to talk about the stress that our business leaders are under, if you want to talk about the number of people that dread going to work, if you want to talk about the environmental and social impact that some companies have. So Twigs and Co., I mentioned this open market gap. Where we start first is organizational sustainability. What are the standard operating procedures and what are the practices of the business that allow the business to keep going? So how has the business built itself to make sure that it has what's called intrinsic leadership bench strength? That way you can hire from within instead of going out. How is the business operating in the community that it exists in what's called a triple bottom line perspective? So imagining the people, the places, and the things. So places as environment, people as society. It starts hitting on ESG. How is it
Anna,
possible?
I apologize again, but ESG is a term a lot of people I know throw around, but not everybody's familiar with it. So could you take that acronym and break it down for us?
Absolutely. And thank you. There's so many acronyms and everything. So ESG is environmental, social, and governance. It sometimes speaks to the same thing as another acronym called CSR, which is corporate social responsibility. All of these speak to what the triple bottom line is kind of getting at, which is people, places, and things, or people, places, and planet. Um, and then, of course, the list goes on because we can do that.
No, that's helpful. I mean, I think you're keen in on something that we may need to have you come back as a guest at another time, and talk about, which is that it's a common failure of entrepreneurs and small businesses that they get all wrapped up in themselves. And part of it is because it's hard to get a business started, and they kind of get into a survival, almost semi-bunker mentality, and they don't really understand that they are part of a social interacting that requires give and get back, and looking out for other people and developing relationships and networks. So I think everything you're talking about is key, not only to success, but to living life the right way. So I appreciate everything that you're doing through Twigs and Company, and we will get back to you and talk to you about this in more detail.
Well, thank you for that. And yeah, it ties in really well because we're looking at this gap of, why is there so much contention in this conversation when you can use business as a force for good? And a lot of it had to do with that framing, that conversation, that I see a lot of people who are in the quote unquote green space come into conversations with this animosity that just turns people off and away from the conversation. And so with language shifting, with opening up and using empathy and reaching across that aisle and like, okay, so what does your acronym mean as opposed to what my acronym means? And just having that conversation more openly. So with Twigs and Co., the idea was of those bullet point reasons why people don't get into sustainability. I was like, oh, perfect. You just gave me a list. Let me answer these questions. And part of it's the cost. So it's like, okay, well, then if it's cost based, well, let's look at organizational sustainability first, because turnover is a huge cost that not a lot of some organization, it depends on the industry, depending on how well organizations track this. And then in looking at environmental impact, we actually started in hospitality in 2019. Something between I've spoken to many bar and restaurant owners, and if they have people stick around, it was interesting. There are two different ends of the spectrum. You have the people who have been there for what seem like decades, but then you also have the people who just pass through in 9 months, and there's a massive rate of turnover, just massively expensive. And then also, if you're not engaging employees enough to put the can in the recycling instead of the trash can, it doesn't matter what infrastructure you have there. So it starts with that engagement piece. So we doubled down in hospitality at the beginning of 2020. And then very quickly that industry went
timing too, as I recall.
Had a great nose for that one, let me tell you.
Yeah.
But what really happened with the pandemic was we saw the weakness of our supply chains, which is something coming from the agricultural background I was eyeballing anyway, being like, this doesn't look like it's set up to be very resilient. And also what I saw, because I was a bartender at the time, moonlighting as a CEO for Twigs and Co. And I saw my friends, I saw my colleagues, I saw our business owners, I saw a lot of small businesses and the people within them lose their entire livelihood, the entire structure through which they were used to living their lives. And there's this joke in the hospitality industry of like, none of us could get corporate jobs. I mean, case in point, I'm an entrepreneur. So
Yeah, I'm not going to point fingers for fear that I'll be looking at myself. I try to explain how I do not work well with others, but I do work well with others. It's just a matter of where I sit when I do that. Yeah, there's so many things here that we can get into, but I need to shift the conversation now to your mayoral candidacy. Tell us a little bit about that. What is that? How did you get to that decision?
well, that's perfect timing, actually. So in getting into this hospitality thing and then getting into the supply chain side of it, we're talking about food security, because if people don't have jobs, then they're not able to get groceries, stuff like that. So then we start working in food rescue, which is, so there's an organization here in Denver called We Don't Waste, and they pick up food and redistribute it in some really gorgeous ways. Interesting supply chain study, if anyone's interested in that listening. So we're working with them. Then we start working with, they call them choice food pantries. So they're grocery store style. You walk through, you pick what makes sense to you, and then you keep going. Well, those tend to be supported by a lot of government initiatives. And then food in and of itself is controlled with a lot of policy. So by the natural progression of being in touch with the stakeholders who control the policies that then control what we can do as sustainability people, what we can do as people in the space, we started sitting on a lot of stakeholder and policy working groups. Now, sitting in these groups, I was listening to these brilliant people come up with these fantastic recommendations, and most of them were pretty good. I feel like I'm not using those terms very hyperbolic in this case, because there's so many incredible people working on things out there that have an environmental upside, they have a social upside, and they have an economical upside. Yes, your rate of return in the short term might be a little bit lower, but if you look at the longevity, this is the trick, is you have to get a longer look. You are going to make more money in a way that actually regenerates the resources that are producing the thing that allow you to make money in the first place. It makes sense. And I kept watching these programs get to certain political levels and then they'd stop. And there are only so many times that I can hear political will being an issue before I'm just going to throw myself against that wall, because, or at least try to climb it, or at least look into it. One of the tenets that I was raised with was my dad's side of the family. We have a reputation for, we get to a wall, we dismantle the wall, we turn it into something useful, and then we continue going. It's just kind of the mode operandus. So in doing that, I started looking at, okay, so in these political positions, which one has the ability to pull the most levers quickly to be able to create the foundation that can provide support, so that way people with good ideas don't have to beat their heads against the wall to see them implemented and actionable. As it turns out, that happens to be the mayor of Denver. There are jokes as I was running that the mayor of Denver has more power than the governor of Colorado. Don't know if I'm supposed to say those jokes on like recordings and stuff, but I kept hearing them, so here we are.
I think that a lot of people in Colorado acknowledge that because the city of Denver has a large budget. It influences, as the centerpiece of the state, more things economically, business wise, otherwise. And whether it's the mayor of Denver or it's the head of the Denver Economic Development Corporation, yeah, we pretty much all think that Denver has huge power, and quite often more than the state. So I'm not sure it's a joke. I think it's just an acknowledgement.
Fair.
So you decided that the perfect place to create the greatest amount of change in the shortest period of time was as the next mayor of Denver.
Yeah. And then looking at the engagement records, so we have in Denver proper, we have roughly 715,000 residents. If you look at voter turnout for the last municipal election, it floats around 164,000 people. So what people were telling me, numbers people were telling me, was that to get to the runoff, I need 61,000 votes. To win the mayor's seat outright, I would need 91,000 votes. You're telling me in a city of 715,000 people, I only need 91,000 votes to get the CEO position, the head position, because in Denver we have a strong mayor set up, which means that the mayor can make a lot of unilateral decisions. The mayor appoints the head of a lot of departments that control a whole lot of stuff around our everyday life. Like, it's crazy. So just from a pure engagement, like, I think my newsletter has a better open rate and engagement rate than voter turnout in Denver.
And I appreciate the fact that you think 91,000 people is a small number. So,
I mean, comparatively to 715, like it's incredible.
when we're doing crowdfunding campaigns, equity crowdfunding campaigns, which almost always are customer focused, 1,000 people is a massive number. And particularly for someone who doesn't know 1,000 people, doesn't have 1,000 customers, and didn't have any infrastructure in place. So how do you, since I'm assuming, and I'm just, this is a big assumption, but correct me if I'm wrong, you don't know 91,000 people personally.
Not directly, no.
So how do you go about meeting them, greeting them, um, converting them to become part of your fan base and support you in a capital, well, not capital, but a political campaign?
Well, that is the trick. In full disclosure, my capital fundraising was not great. This is one of those look in the mirror really hard at yourself and be like, am I doing the best that I can do? Which is part of the reason why I ended up stepping out of the race, especially when a candidate who I believe in and reflects my values and echoes what I was looking to have done has stepped in. So one of the things that we're very adamant about doing and that we have actually seen a significant amount of success in is using groups. So looking at where our stakeholders are hanging out, where are community groups that already care about this intersection of policy and business, policy and community? Where are there already congregations of people talking and working on programs? Because this is one of the things that I really want, that I have highlighted with my campaign and will continue to highlight with my work in Twigs & Co. is it's not a matter of we have to vote for this elected official to save our city. The thing is there's so many brilliant things already happening. You want to look at food justice, you want to look at urban agriculture, clean water, tech startup spaces, BIPOC focused entrepreneurial hubs. Like these all exist within our city already today and have. And it's just a matter of amplifying those voices that are already there. Well, then instead of 91,000 individual people, I'm now meeting, a couple of thousand groups, which is still a big number. Like it rolls off the tongue so easily, but it is a huge number and a huge time and energy commitment.
Right. But I want to emphasize this point because your acknowledgement of the fact that you can't talk to everybody, you don't have the time to sit down and sell 91,000 people on an individual basis. Even if you did 10 people a day, and individually, you'd be sometime into the next century before you got through everything. And so in any campaign, capital campaign, political campaign, you need to work with existing organizations. You need, in effect, to borrow a network from somebody else because the time and energy to build your own network is immense. And the way to shortcut that is to find people who already run a group or a group of people, where they're an influencer, and they're going to give you an opportunity to talk to or work with that group. And suddenly your numbers will swell up into a large enough size for either a capital campaign or even a political campaign.
So it's finding these groups that are already working directly with your stakeholders. First, I would recommend opening up the lens of how you view your stakeholders to this triple bottom line perspective, because then that opens you up to environmental groups, that opens you up to social groups, that opens you up to business and political groups, and that opens up your lens of who you're thinking about as potential customers, as potential people to engage with. The second thing is what was really quite amazing was the amount of traction that I got, the more authentic that I was. Because one of the things that I'm noticing across the board is that people are really tired of this canned same old, same old. So one of the things that attracted people to me and to my campaign, and what attracted, my fastest donors who were like, I need your code right now, I want to donate to your campaign, was when I showed up in my humanness, was when I showed up of like, what I'm doing right now is something that I haven't done before, but I'm here for it because we need this. And it was connecting to that. This is part of a work in progress. And that depends on who you're talking to. And also that is, the conversation around money has been framed as something that is scary. It's full of contention. And even just framing conversations as you're going into them under those parameters makes it harder to approach this conversation anyway. but then also showing up in this space of authenticity, of vulnerability, of like, no, I am actually a real person over here too. That got an incredible amount of traction in the political space. There are groups of people who absolutely want to know that I am well studied, I have answers, I know how to find the people who have the answers if I don't have them. But the amount of traction that comes from saying, I don't know, but I can find out. Let me get back to you. I mean, you already have to get their contact information to be able to get back to them in the first place. So then that
Well,
helps you get back in touch with them.
yeah, and again, there's a very, very strong parallel here. It's a common failing, I don't know whether it's genetic or it's simply an urban myth that entrepreneurs have adopted, but they put together an offering that says, "You have money, give me money, I'm going to make you rich." And that statement is really screaming all about me, all about me, all about me, and says nothing to the person that they're talking to. Even though they say we're going to make you rich, it indicates they don't understand who they're talking to. They're not positioning themselves as a tool or resource to the person they're talking to. And so as we go through the motivated money process, we say you have your story, but you have to tell your story from the perspective of who you're talking to. How do you fit into their goals, their missions? How are you an ingredient in their recipe for success? And so when you went out to people and said, I'm here to figure out how I can help you, you're not claiming victory already. You're not simply saying, send me a check and I'll be the best mayor you ever had. You've changed the entire dynamic of the conversation, and I'm not surprised that you got a very, very positive reaction to that, because that's really what it's all about. It's not all about Anna Burrell, mayor, king supreme, or queen, I guess in this case, but that you are actually trying to figure out what their problems are, try to figure out how to solve them. And now the conversation turns and the relationship evolves, and you now have a relationship. You're not treating people as ATM machines for donor contributions.
Absolutely. And it opens up an entirely different form of capital that is incredibly important no matter what we're trying to do, whether it's make it through life, start a business, raise a business, scale a business, or run a political campaign. It's you have that social capital because people are now invested because they see themselves reflected back in who you are. And then that also opens up an entirely new set of possible investments that people can make. Because yes, money is a big part of it, absolutely. But guess what? You need people. That money goes to fund boots on the ground. That money goes to fund buying print materials that some people may be bought in enough to your cause to be able to donate. That money goes to fund social media managers. And if you get someone passionate enough about what you're doing, and if they see the value in that, sometimes a lot of times people are willing to donate services and skills and materials that you would use money to buy anyway. So then you start getting in-kind donations, then you start getting skill donations, and then that opens up the number of resources that you have to work with.
And at that point, you become larger than yourself. You become part of the community, and all that creates a greater synergy, a greater capability, because you're not the Lone Ranger. You're not standing all by yourself. Um, and I think that makes all the difference to people when they feel that they are actually being listened to. You're not throwing a product or service or a political campaign speech at them. You're talking to them about what are your needs, how can I be of help. If I can't be of help, maybe I can refer you to someone who can be of help. And by doing that, I it's to me, it's like something I have to continually beat on people to, about is it's not about you, it's about everybody else.
Mhm.
But I still have to get out that slogan and talk to people about it when they're running a capital campaign, because it's just too easy for them to default in, well, why don't you write me a check? And the answer is typically no.
Mhm.
So you reached a point, you found someone who you thought could uh, do the job better, or maybe be
Mhm.
a higher candidate or a higher probability of being elected. How did you go about making that decision?
Well, it was a solid process of, and I didn't step into this race lightly. This is something that I didn't necessarily want to do. I've seen myself in and out of politics, but not quite as the candidate. Um, and so I stepped into it carefully, and then in running the race while also trying. So this is the other side of politics. It's part of why it's difficult to get into, or it can be difficult to get into, is because the funds that I fundraise as a candidate cannot go to my living expenses. So that means I have to be able to make rents, buy my food and my dog food, all of this stuff separately. So I stepped into this race without a strong financial backing. And I was also still running Twigs & Co. at the same time. I was working on making sure that my organization, because that was one of the other things is, and this is not true of every political position, but as mayor, they want you to focus on that job. Running the city is a full-time job, and they want to make sure that you are not splitting your attention places. So I would, our mayor cannot have any other sources of income legally. Theoretically, that's what it says on the books. So what I found was that in splitting my attention like that, I wasn't showing up as fully as I could in any of the roles. And it's like, okay, well, how can we leverage groups? How can we make sure, how can I work smarter, not harder in this situation? And it brought me back to the whole reason why I started, which is what is the true impact that I'm looking to have? What are the outcomes? What are the process shifts that I'm looking to be able to facilitate and make? And at that point in time, so the Denver Post ran an article, I think, when there was, oh geez, there were only like 7 of us running or something. Back in the good old days when there were only 7 or 8 candidates instead of 24. Um, One of the women who was named is named Lisa Calderon. So she has been the president of an organization called Emerge Colorado. Now you want to look at stakeholder engagement. Part of making sure that people feel heard on a very fundamental level is not only giving them a seat at the table, but allowing them a voice at the table and a decision-making process at the table and support in being at the table, because we are so much more than just sitting at a table. And I had watched what happens there. I had looked at just being open to looking at environmental policy. So one of the issues that we have here is that environmental policy is often written very stick heavy instead of carrot heavy. And we have a huge opportunity to build in the infrastructure and the wealth that exists in supporting what's called a circular economy. So instead of harvesting materials, using them, and then throwing them away, you're harvesting materials, you're using them, and then they still have purpose all the way to a point where it gets to regenerate that something. It could be that process or another process, but it's called circular economy. We don't currently have the infrastructure. That means that there is a huge market potential. There is a huge number of businesses and services and products that need to be created to be able to realize this dream. We can use policy to encourage entrepreneurs to see that, to encourage people and communities to step up into this space. However, it's more helpful if you write policy that is more carrot than stick on that one, removing Shane from that conversation. So I was asking around, I heard stories, I'd seen the work that she has done, and then final sniff test, I wanted to sit down with her and see what was going on. And so it was checking the ego. I was like, okay, let me come back to the impacts that I truly want to have. What are the reasons why I'm doing this? Checking my ego, being humble enough to approach her. And then instead of as another candidate, because there's so much contention in these races, but there doesn't have to be. So I approached her wanting to see the humanness, because this is the trick on the municipal level, is we need political leaders who are compassionate, who are able to see not only the economical impacts of running a city, but also the human impacts of running a city, because quite frankly, they're so closely tied together. To ignore one is to miss a large portion of the point. So there's a skill set that I was looking for. And so I sat down with her, and we had a good conversation. And then I was just open, and I told her my plans. I was like, look, I heard that you were going to run, and you've finally announced, and I'm very excited about your campaign, because I think that, if just one, the city of Denver is severely understaffed in almost every department. That's part of the reason why we're having such functional issues. And then two, we need more and stronger stakeholder representation in leadership, and just listening to those voices and responding to those voices and implementing the solutions that they already have will fix an incredible number of problems that we're facing right now. And so having someone in leadership who's able to do that is vital. And so it was like checking my ego. She passed the human sniff test, and I was just like, look, these are my plans. Can my platform, can what I've built be helpful to you? And she was like, yes, I love this. It helped me figure out how best to serve, or how best to speak to small business development and sustainability and that environmental policy and stuff like that. So all of my friends are still hearing from me. But it's cool because they're now invested in this municipal race, and people don't pay a lot of attention to municipal races, but literally it shapes the world that we live in very intimate ways.
Yeah, there's so many different threads I could go down, but we're running out of time. But I'm going to close with it's very hard for entrepreneurs to let somebody else do their work for them. Um, we are so wired to do it ourselves, and every day it's sometimes it's an ego thing. Sometimes I swear it's genetic. But, it's checking your ego at the door. And most successful entrepreneurs will tell you what they did is they went out and found people smarter than themselves. You'll hear this story often. And the thing is it's a recognition that as many talents and skills as you may have, it's hard to do anything big and complex without having more people who have different skills and talents all working together to overcome whatever challenges or problems that exist. And so I respect your decision to withdraw and put your support behind another candidate, because as you described it, this person has some stuff going, has a better potential to get into that mayoral seat, and therefore has the better ability to implement the types of programs and policies that you were advancing. And that is there are so many things I could say positive about that, but I appreciate your time here, Anna, today, and sharing with us what you're doing with Twigs and Company, and what you also were doing in the way you're going about running for mayor and advancing some of these concepts to get them into the mayoral seat. Anna, what's your web address that we can share with everybody?
Great question. So for my company website, it is twigsco.com. So that's twigsco.com. We're very active on LinkedIn. We are not the cafe. We are the sustainability consulting firm. So check us out there. And then we have an Instagram, twigs. Let's see. Yeah, it's twigs.co. And we're working on getting better at social media because it's powerful, We know it's powerful. It just takes practice. So work in progress.
I found that the power of social media is directly related to the number of relationships that you have. Having social media by itself doesn't mean much. It's like standing on a street corner with a megaphone. If nobody's listening, it doesn't really matter. But thank you for that, Anna. I very much appreciate it. And one of the things that we're talking about is setting up another podcasting series about entrepreneurs and how they basically crashed and burned and then rose from the ashes into starting yet another business. So I'll be back to you to talk to you about your first business there, and then we'll come back and talk to you about Twigs and Company as well. So that's it for today's episode. For those of you who loved to have something to work on between this episode and the next, sort of a homework assignment, I would ask you to look at your organization, get out a really, really big mirror, and ask yourself, how is your organization contributing to and participating in your community? And that means stepping out of selling products and services. What are you doing? Are you sitting on boards of a charity? Are you showing up at political forums and acting as a voice or representative for your community or for small businesses or your industry? There are so many different ways that your business can and should contribute to your community. And as Anna described it, this may be viewed as a pay it forward, it may be viewed as a pay it back, but it actually will lend itself to your sustainability, to your ability to be here 5, 10, 20 years down the road. And over time, whatever investment you make today, you're going to get paid back. The ROI is actually high. Difficult to measure at times, but it's obvious after you've been in practice or working for a long period of time. So thank you for that. And then also a reminder to everyone, we are going to put on another Motivated Money Boot Camp. This is a 10-week series on raising capital. If any of you are interested in participating in this next boot camp, that'll start on January the 18th. Go to motivated.money. That's HTTP motivated.money, and there'll be more information there about the upcoming series. And we're going to have more guests coming forward. We will take a break, as I've been told, over the holidays, so there may be no episode between Christmas and New Year's, but we'll continue into 2023. Talking to people like Anna about what they're doing, how they're going about raising capital for whatever purpose. And hopefully you will find something of value from today's episode and other episodes. So thank you for listening in today. This is the Motivated Money Podcast with Carl Dakin. Thank you.
Thank you for listening in to Motivated Money. If you like this or any other episodes, make sure to leave a rating and review of the show. We love to hear your feedback and want to make this the best possible show for you. Also, if you like this episode, make sure you share it with someone you know who is seeking to raise capital. They will appreciate learning what you now know about raising funding. I'll see you on the next episode of Motivated Money.